Senator Merkley.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Administrator Wheeler, for coming before the committee. When you were being considered for nomination, I asked you on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being very concerned, how concerned were you about climate change? And you responded an 8 or 9, which means it's a pretty significant concern. So did you increase or decrease funding for climate programs in the 2020 budget as a result of your high level of concern about climate?
I'm sorry, which climate programs are you referring to? Because we are still moving forward on our 2 big climate regulations. We should finalize those this summer. The ACE proposal,
did you
which
increase
will reduce
financing
CO2.
or decrease financing for the Global Change Research Program?
Of the global, yes. That has been eliminated, but we believe we can address those through our regulatory programs and other programs at the agency.
And did you increase or decrease funding for the Atmospheric Protection Program?
Decrease? That has been decreased. Yes.
Was that the $365 million decrease for air quality programs? Or that was also you decreased other programs as well?
I'm sorry, I have to get back to you on that specifically.
Okay. So if you have a high level of concern, how come you're cutting the funding for key climate programs?
Because we are moving forward on our 2 regulations, our ACE regulation will reduce CO2 from power plants by 34%, and our CAFE standard, which we also plan to finalize later this spring or early summer, will reduce CO2 emissions on par with what the Obama administration
I think the world is well aware that that effort will increase carbon pollution, but let's turn to lead. You're probably aware that lead is one of the major health threats for young children in our country. Nearly 500,000 U.S. children, just ages 1 through 5, have blood levels at or above the 5 microgram level, which is where the CDC recommends public health actions be taken. I think you probably understand that there's no safe blood level, but that this is a very serious impact on the developing brains of our children across America. And yet, your 2020 proposed budget slashes EPA's lead program. Why?
It's the lead paint, which is actually, we work closely with HUD. We are moving forward with our lead dust regulation that should be finalized by June. And then we're also proposing our lead and copper pipe rule, which is the first time that regulation has been modernized in over 20 years. So we are moving forward very aggressively on lead, but that particular lead program that you referred to, we found within the administration that was duplicative of what HUD was doing. So we're deferring to HUD on the lead paint, but we're moving forward on the regulations for lead dust, which again will be out in June, and we'll be proposing a lead and copper rule this summer, which will go a long ways to reducing lead exposure to families, and we're looking at mandatory testing in both schools and daycare centers.
Well, it's funny because while you're talking about some future regulation, you're cutting the program for state and tribal assistance grants for lead testing in schools, which means less lead is detected, less action is taken. And so the net impact is that more children get poisoned, and that's really unfortunate under your leadership that more children are going to be poisoned.
We also requested $50 million for our Healthy Schools program, which will be working with schools, not just public schools and private schools, but also tribal schools to address lead and other contaminants located in the schools.
The Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds are something very valuable to particularly my rural communities. When I go to every county every year. I hold a public town hall. I meet with the commissioners and any other electeds beforehand, school boards, city commissioners, so forth. Almost always what comes up is the challenge of clean water supply and wastewater treatment. And it's just a critical piece of infrastructure. Under your proposed budget, states would lose 31% of their potential funding under the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. I know that my rural communities are desperate for more assistance because it's so expensive for a small town to do a treatment center. You just can't spread the costs among enough residents in those smaller towns. So this is going to have a huge impact on infrastructure in rural America. Why would you want to do that to rural America?
Well, the amount that we're asking for this year is at at a reduction, but you have to remember that the overall funds currently available in the overall SRFs across the whole country is $80 billion. We also asked for more funding for AWEA this year. I'm sorry, for WIFIA this year. And AWEA, which passed by Congress last fall, did not receive any money this year, but we're requesting $83 million for that. And there's a number of different small grant programs in the new AWEA legislation. So what we're trying to do is look to see, we know we've been successful in the SRFs, but in order to reach more smaller communities, we think some of the funding mechanisms in the AWEA legislation might be very helpful there. So that's why we're asking for money for that legislation, or for that new statute that was passed last fall. So we're asking for $83 million for AWEA. We asked for an increase over our budget request last year for WIFIA, and with the total amount of money available through the SRFs, we're looking at $80 billion, because every time we put money out through the SRF, it gets repaid. We're also earning interest on it. So there's that bank of money has increased substantially over the years.
Well, I am glad you mentioned WIFIA, Water Infrastructure Finance Innovation Act, because it's an act that I wrote, and I'm pleased it's there. But unfortunately, it's not working for small communities because the fees, administrative fees that are being charged by the administration, are too high. Would like to encourage you to take a look and advocate with administration how to make that program work for small communities.
We're trying that. We've looked at trying to get a few small communities to band together for a loan. We're looking at that in Indiana, for example, where there's several small communities. But we think the new AWEA legislation might actually be better for small communities. So that's why we requested, bless you, that's why we requested money for AWEA.
Thank you.
Let's go to Senator Van Hollen, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Welcome, both of you. Administrator Wheeler, when you were up for your nomination hearing before the Environment and Public Works Committee, you said for the record that, quote, the EPA is fully committed to the Chesapeake Bay program. You haven't changed your position, have you?
No, Senator.
You remain fully committed to that program and think it's a good program, right?
Yes, sir.
I appreciate that because, as you know, in the President's budget, he slashes the program from $73 million a year to $7.3 million. Senator Udall mentioned that when the President was out at the Great Lakes, he on the spot restored the $300 million cut. The other day, after Secretary DeVos defended the cut to Special Olympics, the President reversed that. It does indicate that the whole process on the executive side of the ledger is a bit of a sham here, but I'm pleased that on a bipartisan basis, this committee has continued to fund these important projects. You indicated that the mission of the EPA was to protect the public health and the environment, and I assume you would agree that we should do that using the best science and the best evidence. Is that right?
Yes, Senator.
So my question is, when it comes to climate change, we just heard Senator Hyde-Smith talk about the catastrophic flooding in Mississippi. There's no doubt that we see more frequent and more intense extreme weather events. Why the EPA continues to have taken down the EPA, the portion of the EPA website dealing with climate change. When you go to EPA.climate these days, you get a little headline saying, we want to help you find what you're looking for, and it goes on. It disappeared, the previous climate change portion of the website.
It's my understanding that everything, and I've asked this question of our career technical people multiple times, that everything that was ever on the website on climate change is still avable on the website. It's not highlighted to the same extent that President Obama's EPA highlighted it,
so if you
but it's still on the website.
Mr. Minister, if you want to be taken seriously as an agency that believes in science, you wouldn't disappear the climate change website. Yes, you've archived what was there before the Trump administration. My understanding is when you look at your climate indicators page, you haven't been updating the graphs with the newest information. Will you commit today that you will do that?
I'll have to look into that.
Would you be surprised to learn that the climate indicators page does not allow the graphs to be updated with the most recent information?
I would have to look into that, Senator.
Well, I would hope that the credibility of the agency seems to me is on the line on these issues. People can have their own views, but when you've got the scientific community very clear on this, the evidence is overwhelming. Which leads me to another question, because I am worried about the fact that science is being displaced by sort of political science and political pressure in a number of places around the agency. There's an article, I don't know if you saw it this morning, its headline is, "If I Worked at the EPA, I'd Resign." It's a column in the Washington Post by Bernard Goldstein. Bernard Goldstein was the chair of the Clean Air Scientific Advisory Board in the Reagan administration. He was then appointed by President Reagan to be the head of EPA's Office of Research and Development. And there are 7 members of the Scientific Advisory Board, and he points out that they rely a lot on the scientific information provided by subcommittees to the board. And then he writes, that's how it's supposed to work. In other words, they're supposed to get input from the subcommittee experts. But last October, Wheeler suddenly and high-handedly terminated the subcommittees working to develop recommendations for the particulate standards, as well as the standard for ozone pollution, which is what this advisory board is going to review next. And he says, for the first time, this advisory committee will lack a single epidemiologist. So my question is why? Why eliminate the panel of experts? It seems to me it looks like another step to eliminate outside independent expert opinion.
Absolutely not, Senator. First of all, the Clean Air Act 1990 amendments requires us to review the NAAQS every 5 years. We took a hard look at what was causing the delay, because the agency has never met the 5-year time frame for ozone or PM. Part of the problem was the having the subcommittees, which are not required under the statute, took a lot of time to go back and forth between the subcommittee and the full CASAC committee. So we streamlined the CASAC reviews, so we will get both of those reviews for ozone and PM done within the 5 years. They will be done by the end of next year, which is the requirement under statute. And as I sat down with the head of CASAC—
If I could just ask, I understand. Why not say to the subcommittee experts, here's your deadline, right? If you don't get us the information in time, then we're not going to be able to consider it.
Previous
Rather than
administrations
wiping
have
it
done
out.
that. Previous administrations have done
Right.
that. Well,
I'm asking why this
CASAC—
administration wiped it out.
Because they weren't able to meet their deadlines. They were never able to meet the 5-year deadline. Okay. So what? But I have assured the head of CASAC that if you need outside technical assistance, outside scientific review, they're still allowed and are able and can call up they can reach out to epidemiologists and get additional input. But it was that formal subcommittee review process that took literally months and years.
So are you wiping out all the subcommittees?
No, yes, for the ozone and PM, and then we'll see how that goes as far as the NAAQS.
Why? But you haven't wiped out the other ones.
Well, those subcommittees are just for the NAAQS review process under CASAC for the NAAQS standards. As soon as the 5-year review period is over, we start the next 5-year review.
Yeah,
but the agency has never met the 5-year deadline that is required under the Clean Air Act. Right. So we tried to reform the process in order to meet the deadline given to us by Congress.
You know, I think the concern is this combined with another policy you have where people who are providing, in contracts to the EPA scientists, you're not allowing them to participate, but you're allowing other sort of industry lobbyists to participate. I think I'd like to continue this conversation with you because the credibility of the agency clearly is being hurt here when you disappear the climate page, when it appears that important subcommittees of scientists are being eliminated. And just to end with a point that Senator Udall made, as I understand it, the Assistant Administrator for Research and Development position, which was what this gentleman held during the Reagan administration, is unfilled. Is that correct?
It is. We've had a hard time filling positions because people look at how long the process takes, and they've told us no. You know, when you have the head of our Superfund and emergency response has been waiting 394 days for confirmation. We literally have had people say, we don't want to go through the Senate confirmation process. The confirmation process is broken. And I really hope it can be fixed on a bipartisan
Well,
basis,
I
because we are
mean, there's the
losing
confirmation
qualified
part of
people.
it. There's the confirmation part of it. There's also the reality that lots of people have not been appointed. We can't go through a confirmation process.
We've had
until
people
someone's appointed.
turned down because they look at how long
The suggestion in this article from the person who held this position in the past is the reason scientists are not applying for the job is because they think that their work will be subject to political oversight and not scientific.
I've never met him, and I don't know how he's formed these opinions about me. We've never had any conversations, so I'm not sure why he believes that.
Thank you.